Here's some answers to some of your questions about the AYN Thor. Let's get started. Okay, so firstly, how long does shipping take? So recently there was the Lunar New Year or Chinese New Year, so the production had ceased for a couple of weeks whilst all the workers and China was celebrating. It has now finished, so production has started back up. The best thing to do to see whereabouts your order currently is if you use the shipping dashboard on the AYN website. It's a good indicator of the current shipping status. The way it works is when you've placed an order for your Thor, you'll receive a order number, and the first few digits of that order number are your batch. So if you look at the shipping dashboard, you'll see 1234XX, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6XX. Then you can kind of determine of those batches roughly where or how long you might have to wait. It's not an exact science by any means, and the way they do things, they tend to do things in quite weird batches. I don't work in a production facility, so I'm not sure of the minutiae of it. But basically, what it seems to be is they'll do a run of purples, and then they won't do any purples for a while. They'll do a run of blacks, run of rainbows, run of whites, and then some of them they might do the max models. They might do one batch of the lights a month. So, like I said, not an exact science, but a rough estimate. Once it was dispatched, so I live in the UK, and I ship through 4PX. I believe it was about a week and a half from the actual shipping notification to it arriving on my doorstep. So you can, if you check with the 4PX tracking, once it kind of gets to your local, your country, then you'll notice that the updates seem to stop. That at that point, it's been passed to your local character. So for me, I think it was Royal Mail, but your mileage may vary depending on what country you are in. What's the best front end? So this is entirely down to personal preference. There's some absolutely great front ends out there. There's the big ones being Cocoon and Isu. They're more of your kind of classic DS style layouts for those of you who like to tinker and customize. Me, I don't care too much for those. I think there's some cool little features on them. They do look nice, but at the end of the day, I just like having a nice little front end just to display my games and nothing more. I don't care for features like Discord integration or a lot of the kind of bells and whistles that tend to come with a lot of front ends. So there's no real answer to what the best front end is. It's ESDE, by the way. CitraMMJ versus CitraMMJ Antutu. So Antutu versions of CitraMMJ, which is a 3DS emulator. There's also Antutu versions of, I know there's Game Native, there might be some others. Basically, the Antutu versions trick the device into thinking that it is running a benchmarking app. So a benchmarking app, for those who aren't aware, is a way to kind of push the device to its limits to test it. So it tricks the device into thinking it's like in test mode. As for the performance gains, they will technically push the device. It's a bit like overclocking, if you're familiar with overclocking in PCs. However, the performance gains are probably barely noticeable, maybe on a few select games, and also with pushing the device further than intended, you can potentially lead to some instability with the games you already have. So for me personally, just stick with the standard versions. There's no real reason to use the Antutu versions unless you kind of want to have a play around and do some testing. RetroArch cores versus standalone emulators. So RetroArch is basically a big hub for emulation, and it comes with, or you can download, a lot of cores, which are essentially kind of mini emulators that live inside RetroArch, which it can be quite handy to have them all in a unified front. However, RetroArch, for those of you who have experienced it, not the most user-friendly of softwares. In terms of what's best, the standalone versions or the RetroArch cores, for your classic systems, no real difference. When you get to kind of your Dreamcast PS1 era, it's entirely down to personal preference. I know for PS1, so I use DuckStation, which is the standalone version. There is also Beetle PSX, which is the RetroArch core. That does run fine. Personally, I prefer to use DuckStation because it gives you more granular control over things like your texture upscaling, and there's a few more extra settings that aren't present in the RetroArch core. With that, I know some of them. There's Yaba Sanshiro for the Sega Saturn, and there's also Flycast for the Dreamcast. So in terms of performance, I haven't really noticed too much of a difference. However, one of the things I do quite like about things like RetroArch is because it's unified, you have access to shaders that aren't always present in the standalone versions. A lot of them don't have Retro Achievements integration, whereas Retro Achievements is baked in to RetroArch. So for RetroArch, you could get away with using everything up to the PS1 Dreamcast generation, and then it's all down to personal preference. I always have the standalone versions installed, and then if I find that a game isn't performing too well, I might kind of play around with it. But for me, standalone versions for anything later than PS1, and RetroArch for everything else. Best firmware or keys for Eden. So Eden is the secret console emulator by Nintendo, and basically the firmware and the keys are a list of the product keys that that Eden uses to bypass the copy protection on the games. In terms of firmware, just use the latest version you can find. The same for the keys. If it works for you, just leave it as is. There's no need to keep upgrading. If you come to if a new game comes out, for example, and you find that the game doesn't work, or you get some missing keys errors, or you get a black screen, things like that, then, and if there's an update available, update to the latest firmware, see if that works. Not a guarantee, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So just get the latest at whatever the time you're viewing this is, and if it works, great. And if a new one comes out, just don't worry about it until you need to. Nether SX2 patched versus classic. So I was going to do a comparison video showing the performance differences between the two. However, once I tried to look into it, there wasn't really much in terms of actual performance. It's more about how things run on the device itself. So for the AYN Thor, just use the patched version, or the classic isn't not a great deal. I believe there are some very, very specific games. I think there's a NASCAR game or something that works better on the classic, but not so much on the patched. Not 100% about that. I haven't tested it myself. It's just what I've seen online. If you're using the AYN Thor, stick with the patched. If you're using a older device, or I think some older phones that have the Mali GPUs, they apparently run better with the classic version. So in terms of raw performance, there's very, very, very limited difference. Nothing that you'd really notice. It's more about what's kind of most suitable for the device. So there's no wrong answer. Just for the AYN Thor owners, stick with the patched version, and for anyone else, use the classic. So there we are, just some more answers to some of the questions I've seen floating around online. And if anyone has any other questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'm quite active in replying, unless you ask where you can download games, in which case I've stopped replying and I've just started ignoring you. So if you like this video or it helped you out, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe. You can support the channel. There are links in the description below to do so. Tell your friends, and I'll see you next time.